Something's felt off about hip hop recently, but I couldn't really describe it until I happened to watch a baseball spring training game last week, and then it all came together in my head. I guess I need to explain more, and what better way to explain than with a handy PowerPoint? 2026 has started out with a couple major drops in hip hop from veterans of the game. ASAP Rocky's Don't Be Dumb and J. Cole's The Fall Off were highly anticipated. Both these artists have been around for a while, and their latest projects made me nostalgic for their early classic mixtapes, like Rocky's Live Love ASAP and Cole's The Warm Up. While I was going back to listen to those again, I started thinking about a couple opinions that people seem to have more and more about rap these days. The past couple years, I've heard more people start to share some of the same thoughts. Hip hop's declining, and there's really no one good who's up next. They're saying that rap just isn't as popular as, let's say, 2015 to 2019, and that there's a lack of talent among young rappers. Now, people have been saying this for the past 30 years about the younger generations, but I feel like the numbers are kind of backing this one up. We've seen a decline in top 10 rap hits, and album sales are down relative to previous years. But does this actually mean that rap is in a slump in 2026? Well, I would say yes. And here's where the baseball part comes in. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, baseball in the US has a major league and minor league teams. The major league is the top professional level with the star players who compete for the World Series each year, while the minor leagues have the up-and-comers who are trying to get their shot. They play the same game, but are at two different stages of their careers. I thought I would go back in time to compare rappers the exact same way. Starting in 2011, I chose a major league and a minor league team of 9 rappers each every 5 years. I feel like this is the best way to show how hip-hop has been changing over time. Now, for the major league, I based the team off of mainstream attention, so not necessarily who was the most talented always, but who had the most eyes on them and why. Again, these are the stars at the time. The minor leaguers hadn't quite made it to that level of stardom at the time, but still had a lot of buzz around them for one reason or another. I tried my best to pick what I felt was the right team for each year. You can certainly disagree with who I chose for any of them. Alright, now that I explained all that, let's go back 15 years. The year is 2011. It's time to see who's on the major league roster. We'll start with a couple of legends, Eminem and Kanye West. Kanye had dropped one of his best albums the year before, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, and M was coming off recovery around this time, which was a solid follow-up after Relapse, but at this point was clearly not reaching the levels of his prime in the early 2000s. Either way, both these guys were huge, they make the team. Next up is Lil Wayne. Similar to Eminem, his best work was behind him at this point, but was still a global star. The Carter 4 sold amazingly. And speaking of Wayne, we've got a couple of Young Money rising stars, Drake and Nicki Minaj. Drake would release Take Care this year and influence the sound of music. Meanwhile, Nicki was in the middle of a transition into pop stardom. Lupe Fiasco and Rick Ross were also experiencing big commercial success. Lupe was pivoting away from his earlier sound with lasers, and Ross was coming off of Teflon Don. And finally, we have another couple of up-and-comers. Wiz Khalifa went from popular mixtapes to his big debut, Rolling Papers, while Kid Cudi had already been displaying his unique sound on his 2 Man on the Moon albums. So again, here's my major league team for 2011. I also listed the age that they would turn in this year. We'll talk about that later. There are some big names on here, obviously, but I would actually argue that this wasn't a great time for mainstream hip-hop. I feel like everyone around this time was kind of chasing commercial hits with a certain radio-friendly pop sound, and a lot was starting to sound a little bland. Especially when you look at Lupe, Wiz, Wayne, they were kind of putting out some of their most lackluster work around this time. I think some rappers were definitely less focused on their artistry while trying to appeal to a wider audience. Guess it's time to check out the minor league team. Wait, hold up a second. This lineup is absolutely stacked. Again, these are the rappers who weren't quite at the mainstream level yet, but look at who's on this list and the mixtapes they had been dropping around this time. ASAP Rocky, Live Love ASAP. Meek Mill, Dream Chaser series. Kendrick Lamar, Overly Dedicated. J. Cole, The Warm Up and Friday Night Lights. Big Sean, hadn't dropped Detroit yet, but it was coming. Mac Miller with Kids. Tyler, the Creator, Goblin. Big Crit, Crit Was Here. And Wale? Honestly, probably the most established artist on this minor league list, borderline major league with his studio album Ambition. Basically, we are talking some classic projects here. You've got a whole generation of young artists doing super creative stuff and ready to break through. If you looked at the minor league roster at this time, the future of hip-hop was bright. Fast forwarding 5 years, it's 2016. Who makes the major leagues for this year? At this point, the big 3 is dominant. They would have the 3 highest selling projects of this year. Drake's Views would do over 1 million units first week. Kendrick Lamar put out an amazing collection of demos that was super popular. Of course, it doesn't hurt when he had dropped one of the best rap albums ever the year before. And J. Cole was still riding high off of 2014 Forest Hills Drive, and his newest project, For Your Eyes Only, was highly anticipated. Next, we've got a couple rappers by way of Chicago. Kanye was still huge. The Life of Pablo is probably his worst project at the time, but was still solid. And Chance the Rapper was a breakout star with Coloring Book that followed his earlier success. These next two artists reflect the rise of melodic rap around this time. Travis Scott was steadily building a huge fan base with his sound, and a year earlier in 2015, Future had one of the best hot streaks for an artist ever. To round out the lineup, we've got Meek Mill. Now, he obviously didn't have the best 2015, but his projects were still very popular and he was ready for a rebound. And finally, Big Sean, who had reached big league success with his project Dark Sky Paradise in 2015. So these were the major leaguers for 2016, a lot of familiar faces. But who was on the rise in the minor leagues? Well, one look at this list and you can see the clear trend towards the dominance of trap music in the mid-2010s. Young Thug and Migos had been steadily putting out mixtapes and definitely had hits at this point, still on the brink of mainstream stardom. Next, we've got some great examples of breakout stars with viral hits, with Uzi, 21, Kodak, and Yachty. And rounding out the list with some regional stars like Denzel Curry, Isaiah Rashad, and G Herbo. Now, a few things looking at the minor leagues here. Other than probably Denzel and Isaiah Rashad, not the most lyrical group overall. This reflects the changing sound of this era. This group doesn't necessarily have the bars of the previous minor leaguers from 2011, but still definitely had a lot of star potential. And we know now that despite their different sound, most if not all of these artists would continue to have successful careers and were able to make it into the majors. So to recap for 2016, changing trends in the rap game, but still a good class of minor leaguers. Alright, now it's 2021. Big artists were gradually starting to put out music again after the pandemic had started the year before, so let's see who's in the major leagues. The big three hasn't moved an inch. Drake had started to decline creatively by this point, but Certified Lover Boy was still a smash hit. Kendrick was ramping back up with some features and setting the stage for a huge comeback the next year. And J. Cole was building hype for the possible last phase of his career with the Off-Season album. Next, we've got some strong representation from trap. Lil Baby's My Turn in 2020 had launched him into the top level of stardom. Travis was in between his mega hits Astroworld and Utopia. Future, still on a consistent run well into his career. And Young Thug had pivoted more into the mainstream starting back in 2019 with So Much Fun. And for the last two spots, there were a few different choices, but I went with a couple of new faces. Tyler the Creator was on a hot streak of critically acclaimed projects, and Call Me If You Get Lost was one of the best albums of this year. And Megan Thee Stallion represented the surge of female rappers with consistent success the past couple years. Let's check out the major leaguers again for a second. A lot of the same names are still coming up. But things really start to get interesting in 2021 when you compare the minor league teams to the previous years. All these artists were making noise around this time for one reason or another. Baby Keem's album did really well. Back in Blood was a big hit for Pooh Shiesty. And Yeet was gaining a lot of buzz on the internet. But if you look at this group, do you really see the mainstream star potential from some of the earlier artists? I mean, let's look ahead to today. Baby Keem has a dedicated fan base, but his long break from music kind of kept him out of the top tier. I guess Coi Leray had a big hit with Players a couple years ago. And Pooh Shiesty's working on a decent comeback after his time in jail. But I would say that today, this category of rappers is pretty much in the same spot that they were in 2021. There really weren't the breakout stars that we had seen in the previous 2 years we looked at. And in 2021, if the minor league team wasn't looking all that strong, that would seem to hint that 5 years later, there wouldn't be a lot of new energy in the rap game. And speaking of 2026, that brings us to today's major league team. Kendrick and Drake are still here. Gotta separate those two this time. Both are still super popular. Obviously, Kendrick in particular had an unbelievable 2024. J. Cole's The Fall Off was a major success to start this year, and Travis Scott and Future are still going strong. Playboi Carti makes his first appearance here. He had the highest selling rap album of 2025 with Music. Tyler the Creator dropped not one, but two acclaimed projects recently. For the last two slots, I chose Glorilla and Doechii. I feel like Glorilla is one of only maybe a couple rappers in the last few years who actually went from unknown to a consistent star. And Doechii's a multi-talented artist who last year became only the third woman ever to win a Grammy for Best Rap Album. Okay, you know the drill. Here's the major league team again. And for one last time, we're going to check out the minor leagues. I'm going to be completely honest, I had a huge struggle picking a team for this year. When I looked around, I genuinely was not sure who could really be considered a rising star. I mean, Ken Carson has the Opium fan base. Big X the Plug has hits, and he's tried to cross over with country. You have some artists that are popular online like Laser Dim, Ian SD Kid. I feel like V's is respected among hip hop fans. But rap is just so fragmented these days that do you really think any of these people is going to be the next global superstar? Maybe I'm just getting old, but I would not bet on it. Clearly something has changed from 2011 to 2026 when we look at the quality of the minor league team over time. And there's one thing in particular that I'm going to use to highlight this. Since we've gone through the teams, let's take a look at one set of numbers. The average age of the major league team from each year. In 2011, it was right around 30 years. Pretty much the same, slightly under in 2016, a little bit older in 2021, almost 32 years. But 2026, it was 35.4 years. Just to be clear, this is not normal. Sorry to any 35-year-olds out there, but hip-hop has historically been dominated by younger artists. That's just kind of the way it's always been. If you look at huge superstars in the rap game, a lot of their peaks were over a relatively short period of time, kind of early in their careers. I'm talking about Nelly, 50 Cent, Wayne. Still being at the top of the game well into your 30s is something that we just really haven't seen for the genre before. Again, looking at the major leagues from 2026, it's genuinely crazy that more than half of these artists have been at the top of their game for over a decade. Seriously, look at Future, Kendrick, J. Cole, Drake. That longevity is just not normal in hip-hop history. And I feel like a big reason why we still see the same names at the top is because no one's really come along to replace them. So why is this? What's going on with hip-hop? Well, there are a few things in my opinion. Like I mentioned before, the bench is kind of empty. Lyricists aren't really mainstream right now. There are rappers who have a couple hits maybe, but don't necessarily have star potential. And just like how baseball might have to deal with attention going to other sports leagues, the average music consumer is checking out other genres more than before. Now, in the 2010s, rappers sort of became the modern pop stars. I would say there's been a resurgence recently in bona fide pop stars back on the charts. Other genres like country are on the rise, and more listeners are turning to international music too. Again, for the average top 40 listener, there's just a lot of different directions to look rather than hip-hop. And I also feel like there's just a different approach these days to coming up in the rap game. Rappers aren't grinding for years to build a following and hope to get signed to a label. It's way easier to try to chase a viral hit on TikTok than it is to put out a series of free mixtapes like in past decades to build your fan base. So, in my opinion, I think all these factors play a role. But as I was making this video, one obvious thing just sort of struck me when I hadn't even thought of it before. And unfortunately, it's a tragic one. Over the past decade, rap has lost so many young artists. If you just look at Pop Smoke, Juice WRLD, and XXXTentacion's short careers, I think all three of them absolutely had superstar potential. We really will never know what mainstream hip-hop would look like today if these three and many other artists were able to still make music. And because of this and the other reasons I mentioned, hip-hop might be facing some tough times over the next few years. Now, I've been a little negative about current mainstream hip-hop so far, but we've been here before. Remember, I started my teams in 2011, but if I had gone back 5 years, we would have seen Nas put out his album Hip Hop Is Dead in 2006. And if you had looked around at that time, you might have agreed with him. This was before the next generation of great lyricists that we talked about had emerged, and before the whole blog era gave us classic mixtapes. This just shows that an observation today is not a prediction for tomorrow. Things could look completely different a couple years from now. I have no idea. And one other last thing. In this video, I've mostly been focusing on commercial stardom within hip-hop. It's not just album sales, but also includes things like who's in the public eye, how much mainstream attention they have, becoming a household name. But outside of that part of it, rap is still great. It may not always be as chart-topping as in past years, but there will always be amazing hip-hop out there. There has been for the last 40 years, and there will be 40 years from now. And whatever happens in the future, I know I'll still be listening. How about you?